probably around 1979, Deng Xiaoping. This was the time that the country was in turmoil. There was a group of people after Mao's death started to try to start the Cultural Revolution again. I'm old enough to remember people telling and hearing it being discussed that China may implode. Institutions were weak when they started. Now they're much stronger, but were weak. This is a really great book that actually says development starts within the weakness of institutions, not first institutions and then let's hope for it. Because things have to happen at some point. So, what matters? Well, clearly politics will matter. But one of the unfortunate things, and I call it unfortunate things in research, is that actually, on average, democracies and autocracies do not perform differently in economic growth. By the way, democracies are a bit more inclusive, and they do a bit better on education, but it's not massive. Actually, the difference is not very big, but it keeps me being a Democrat in one way. When we look at the data across the world about growth, there is much more variance and variation in the performance of autocracies. So some of the best performing states in the world are autocracies, but also some of the worst. Democracy seems to make the variance less. So they are not as good as the best performers, but they're not as bad as the worst performers. So you can understand that. There is accountability processes that stops maybe that short-term pressures override long-term pressures. That makes me still a Democrat, because the only problem with the autocracies is that I can't quite pick whether I'll have a terrible general or a really good general. And you can't pick it. So whenever someone like in Nigeria says, we need a hard hand of government back and thinking of the army taking control, I say, just look at your own history. You had some terrible ones, and yes, you had some good ones, and you can't pick them. So there's other things though, and that makes me uncomfortable as an economist who really believes in markets. It's not as simple to say you have to make a choice ideologically whether it's start with markets or state-led. In fact, if you look at successful countries in recent times, within the confines of my measures, Bangladesh, Indonesia, Ghana, lots of growth, lots of progress in poverty reduction, they did market-led. But actually, countries like Ethiopia and indeed China were very much state-led. And in fact, India had to move away from relatively state-led to liberalized markets to progress. In fact, again, across the world, it's too simple, its ideology. It's not about the state should do it or the market should do it. One of the things that is really striking in the comparative evidence is you better understand your own state. If you have a weak state that has very poor bureaucratic systems, very poor accountability systems, don't think you can do a Korea or Japan or indeed China. If you have very much, if I was ever asked going back in history, where would you like to do state-led development? I probably would have picked Korea, Japan, or China with 1,000 years of meritocratic bureaucracy, 1,000 years of centralized taxation, 1,000 years of very well-established state institutions. Okay, then I can do something with it. But if I come in institutions that are kind of weak, organizations that have all kinds of issues, you probably can't do that. The final thing as an economist, again, makes a bit of